Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Da 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 da. Oh, look who's here. Cindy's here. Cindy, oh, I'm sorry to hear that it got canceled, but I'm glad you're here. Good morning. Good morning. So, what are we doing today? Letters. Letters. You know, one of the jokes as you're growing up is, it's kind of risque. Size doesn't matter. Well, you know what? It does. It does. Size matters in embroidery, with lettering. Well, I hope the weather is better for you next week. So when you're stitching letters, when you're stitching text, you need to be aware of the sizes. The size tall, and I like to work in millimeters. Um, and the width of the column, not how wide the whole letter is, but just the column that is creating that letter. So, in preparation for this broadcast, I did a little homework. All right. Um, you hear all the time from teachers and digitizers who are trying to pass on the skill that you should do test stitching. Well, guess what? I agree. And this is what I did for today's class. Yeah. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So, anyways, we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to talk extensively about 3 millimeter text. And 3 millimeter text stitched using 40 weight thread. 40 weight thread with a 7511 needle. Not a 60 weight thread, not a 65-9 needle, 40 weight thread with a 7511 needle. It can be done. And today we're going to talk about how to make that happen. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to pop up and we're going to start right at the top. Let's see if we do this. And then we do this. Oops, that's too much. Oh, that's better. Okay, so our first sample here amounts to a 2-inch tall letter, which means if we measure it, the column is almost 12 millimeters wide. Now, when we digitize, we know that we want to use satin stitching for letters. Makes a beautiful letter, right? But when you get to the point where your column stitch is over 8 millimeters, then you run the risk of sagging satins. Or the satins are too long, or the machine's going to read it as a trim and jump situation. So when you have that, let me just exit this again. When you have that, you want to use a complex fill. Let's see if we can ungroup these. You want to use just a standard tatami fill stitch. And because you're using a tatami fill stitch, your underlay can be pretty basic. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. Let's see if we can get some more enlargement here so you can see this. In this case, we're using an edge run underlay and a double tatami underlay to give it support. And then we're also using just a standard dot 40 density. So, it's just your standard tatami. Good morning, Jesse. Good morning. It's so good to see you here today. Now, when you have to do a large letter like that, when you have to do a column stitch that is wider, and you have to use a tatami to create it, one of the things I like to do is find a way to finish these edges. Tatami stitch is a good stitch, but I feel that when it's larger, it looks unfinished because the edges look raw. So what do I do? And I'm sure you've done this too. I just put a border around it. Whether I use a contrasting border to highlight it or a border of a matching color so that it blends. I like to put a border. So that's the over large lettering. That was easy enough, right? Let's go down here. I did these. I did a 20 millimeter, a 10 millimeter, and then we get down to the smaller sizes. The 20 millimeter and the 10 millimeter, when it comes to the underlay, we have a bit of a difference here. Let me go back up and let's see if we can do this. What happens if we do a selected? Oh, good. That's a nice size. This one, if we measure, it's about a 5 millimeter column. It's a 20 millimeter tall letter, which puts it just under an inch. And it's a 5 millimeter wide column, which is good. It's going to allow us to do some good support underneath. When I have a column stitch, and this is whether it's lettering or regardless, whether it's lettering or any other just satin stitch, if it's over 3, 4, 5 millimeters, I like to do an edge run underlay. And if you're afraid that edge run might pop out in your project, you can adjust this to come in a little bit further. The standard default in the will count software is a .35 margin, which means that from the actual edge of the letter, it comes in 35%. Okay? But we can change that. Watch what happens if I change this to 50 and enter. All right? So 50, a 0.50 millimeter, a half a millimeter, will give you a little wiggle room, and it will still give you the support you need. Now, why do people use an edge run underlay with embroidery? Let me show you. We're just going to make a couple of lines here. Let's pretend that that is an edge run underlay. Let's see if we can't move the start and stop. There we go. So this is the edge run underlay. And what happens when you use an edge run underlay with a satin stitch is the edge run works like railroad tracks. I know, train going down the tracks, you got to keep the wheels on the track. What this does is it allows the points to come outside the track, and it gives you a beautiful, crisp satin stitch. It keeps all the edges about the same width. Yes, of course, you've got the hole penetration, but it holds the threads on the track and gives you a nice uniform crisp line. So if you have a satin column that is 3, 4, 5 millimeters, use that edge run underlay. It'll give you a beautiful satin stitch. Now again, we've got our underlay. I'm using an edge run. I'm also using a zigzag here depending on where my lettering is. There it is. Lettering is a zigzag. We've got the edge run underlay. The density, I'm using just the default density. For garments, that default density works really well. For hats, I do tighten it up just a little bit more. But, this is just a nice larger size. The same holds true with the 10 millimeter. Only now, with the 10 millimeter lettering, our column is only 2.28 millimeters wide, which means we don't want to use an edge run. Let's see if we can do this again. Selected. Oh, yeah, that's nice. If we do an edge run, I want to change this to a center. If we do an edge run, and we bring that edge run to a 0.5 millimeter, like we have the others, then we're bringing that edge virtually on top of the center run. And yes, it would be nice if there was enough room there to give us that nice crisp edge that we got with our railroad tracks in the previous. And yes, you can do some testing and see if you like that. I find that at the narrower columns, the edge run bulks up underneath the lettering too much. So I usually just use a simple center run underlay. Now again, with the fills, I use just a default. Everything at this point is pretty much just the defaults. Whatever the software is set up for its best results. They work well. Again, you can do your test runs and find out, for yourself. But it's when we get smaller that we start getting adjustments. Let's see, where are we again? We want to get down here to the 5 millimeter people. In our 5 millimeter letters, and that's pretty much our standard lettering for logos. A lot of times it'll be small, and I don't consider a 5 millimeter letter to be small. It does need some special consideration, but a 5 millimeter letter can be easily worked with a 40 weight thread and a 7511 needle. There's a lot of talk out there about using 60 weight thread on a 5 millimeter letter. Just know that if the 5 millimeter letter is not digitized for 60 weight thread, that you're going to have your density is going to be a little open. Cindy says that the only thing she sometimes changes on the defaults is the underlay, depending on the item she's sewing on. Yes, you're right. Part of the formula is, in a good stitch out, is the stabilizer. It's like baking a cake. You want to have the right ingredients. Your ingredients that don't change for a particular project is the stabilizer, the fabric, the thread, the needle. Now, when it comes to the thread or the stitches, you may need a little bit of more of this part and a little less of that part, just like with a recipe. And that's kind of what we're doing here is we're building recipes. And let's go back up to our D. Now remember, this is a 5mm letter, which has a column of 1.45 or 1.5 millimeters wide. That's what I consider to be the best stitch out for a satin column, is at least 1.45. Yes, you can go smaller, but if you don't have the experience to understand the concepts behind a 1.45 millimeter column, then you don't want to go smaller, because then you need to have more information. You need to understand more about how it's going to stitch. So with a 1.45, and again, we're going to go back up to the D. I'm going to come down just a little bit. If I were to put an edge run underlay here, that's all it is. Now you just bulked up the center area of your letter with 2 lines of stitches. A 40 weight thread is about a half a millimeter, no, it's about a quarter of a millimeter wide. So now you've just put a half a millimeter of thread in the center of your letter. When you're under the 2 millimeter wide satin, consider using just the simple center run. Again, I'm using the default here for the density. At this point, we're also going to talk about compensation. I'm using the default compensation because I don't need to bulk it up any. If I were to increase my compensation, it would push the letters out from my edge, because we know that the satin is going to suck itself in and make itself thinner. I do increase my compensation when I'm stitching for a hat, when I'm digitizing for a hat, but I do not change my default compensation for just a standard 5 millimeter letter. One more thought before we go forward. We're working with a block style lettering here. There's no little serifs. Is that what it's called, a serif? You know, the little pokey parts that come off some of the lettering. There's no curves. There's no swirls for, you know, a script lettering. So all of those things are going to be considerations in your recipe for your file. Now that we've gotten through the basics, let's get to the next one. This is where our work comes into play. This is a 3 millimeter tall letter. The satin width, the column, is less than 1 millimeter. All right, we got that? Your machine will give you a hard time if you try to stitch under 3 millimeters tall. If you try to stitch under that 1 millimeter column, it's going to get a little fussy if you don't do some changes. Okay? Again, we're going to find our letter D. And we're going to go to selected. I'm going to drop this down a little bit. If you look at this letter D, I have no underlay in that letter D. Good morning, sunrise tactical gear. Good morning. Where are we at? There it is. Good morning. Talking about lettering. You're just in time for teeny tiny letters. As I was saying earlier, the 5mm letter, I don't consider that to be a small letter. I don't even consider a 6mm letter to be small. Or I'm sorry, a 4mm letter to be small. Under 4mm, that's when the hard part comes in. This is a 3mm letter, and again, I have no underlay in there. No underlay. That's because, remember way back up here at the top, we did the railroad tracks. Where did they go? There they are. We did the railroad tracks and talked about how those railroad tracks hold the satin to make a nice smooth satin across the top. Well, if we go back to our tiny letters, that D that D has no room for the railroad tracks. It has no room for a row of stitching down the center. Remember, that's going to be almost as wide as our whole letter. So we really don't want to put that in there. And there's really not a lot of room for our standard default density, which is 0.36. Yes, 0.36 millimeters. Okay. If we did a 0.36, we have laid and bulked up those stitches. What's happening here is your needle, let's see how we can display this. Your needle is 7.5. Okay, that's a needle punch right there. Takes 2 needle punches to make that stitch, right? But we only have we only have 0.82 millimeters. So if we go up here, okay, so this is 82 millimeters, 0.82 millimeters. Your needle penetration is 0.75. You need 2 needle penetrations. If we penetrate the needle here, And then we come back and take it over here. Remember, our needle's going to go center down from our 82. This is the thread, or excuse me, this is all the fabric you have between there. Sunrise is saying that she tells her customers this 4 millimeters is the smallest she can go, that she doesn't really want to have a problem with embroidering small letters. And I can't blame you. Over time, your skill set will increase and you may want to experiment with smaller letters, but this is why the smaller letters can be an issue. Your needle penetration leaves, what is that? That's not even, I don't even know if we can measure that. Not even a tenth of a millimeter of fabric to support that stitch. So yes, we're going to do this. We're going to use the 40 millimeter, or excuse me, the 40 weight thread with the 7511 needle. We know that we have minimal thread, minimal fabric between our stitch penetrations. So what do we want to do? We do not want to have any more stitch penetrations than we really need to make this letter distinguished and legible. So we're going to increase our density. And because we have increased our density, or excuse me, decreased our density, so we have fewer stitches, and we know we don't have any choice. We know that satins are going to suck themselves in. We need to give more column to our tiny letter. And to do this, we're going to increase our pull compensation. Okay? Okay. So, how do we know how much pull compensation we need to use? How do we know how much, what our density needs to be? Oh, I love it. Sunrise Tactical Gear, his name is Scott, and his preferred pronouns are he, dad, and grandpa. I love it. Welcome, Scott. Okay, so let's go back to this 3 millimeter lettering. How do we know what the settings need to be? That's next on our projects. Let's go over here. Let me find it. We run tests. All right, so that's what this is. This is a test. I made 5 letters, 5 columns of each set of letters. I have a range of densities from 40, dot 40 to dot 60, and a range of compensations. All right. This is a question out to all of you. Using the column and heading identifiers, which set of letters do you think give the best representation of what we want to use? The 0 comp 60 is terrible in my opinion. In fact, all of the 0 compensations are terrible. If you'd like, I can enlarge this more. Let's see how far we can go. Remember, our goal is a good identifiable letter that is legible, keeping in mind that odds are somebody is not going to put their nose up to our shirt to read the letters. Which one do you like best? I don't really like any of the B's. You know, a B is made with two holes in the center, and there's really not enough room to create that B at 3 millimeters. In a moment, I'm going to show you how to do a B at this size and have it look good. All right? But think about it. I want you to look at this and tell me which lettering you think looks best. Now, this is your opinion, not mine. Scott, I like the 6017. That looks good. I like the 4517 also. Jesse likes the 45. You know what? Looking at this, I don't like the E's either for the same reason as the B's. So the technique I'm going to show you in making a tiny E and a tiny B will work with any of the letters that have this type of issue. All right, let's go back to our digitizing software. And I need to, I did not digitize all of these letters manually. I used a pre-digitized font in software. Okay. Because remember, I just wanted to do some samples here. So I'm going to take this pre-digitized letter that I have, and I'm going to break it apart. Jessie is saying that she isn't really thrilled with any of them. I'm going to pull this back. Okay. Remember the goal. Remember the goal is to be legible at a personal distance. Okay. I can read all of those. If I could make it smaller, I would. But I can read all of those. And that's our goal. You're not going to get stitch perfect at 3 millimeters. Okay, we're going to go back because we're running a little long here. Let's go back and take care of that technique for working with the E. All right, so I'm going to break this apart. And the part I don't like is this part right here. It's just too wide. There's not enough room between here and here to make that E legible. So what am I going to do? I am going to take a running stitch, and we'll start it in center here. I'm going to come out, and then I'm going to go back in. That is my E. Of course, that'll be under the E and not on top of. Okay. Let's go over here to the B. Same thing. We're going to break it apart. We're going to cut this part out of here. We want to keep our curve because that's what makes a B a B. But we're going to cut this piece out. Okay. And then we're going to take and make our B. This was too much. This is just right. So that's how we're going to deal with letters under 4 millimeter. Under 4 millimeter, we're going to under 4 millimeter, using the 40 weight thread with a 7511 needle. Okay, so how did I learn this? You know me. I patronize a lot of different embroidery teachers. Um, uh, DJ Anderson, Eric Campbell, even some of the new up and comers, because everybody has a different technique. Okay, everybody has a different technique. So you're going to pick up this bit that you like here and that bit that you like there, and you're gonna build your own technique. I want to share with you, and this is not a commercial. This is I have no affiliation. What else do they say? I just like the product. Sorry, I need to have a sip. So, one of the teachers out there that I really like is Balboa Threadworks. Is that what it is? It's Balboa. Lee Caroselli. Yeah. Balboa Threadworks. In fact, I'll put her contact information on in the listings on my YouTube. She recently, and she does this often, she has a membership sale for her website. And she also has an offering of all of her classes up to whatever the date offering is. And how do I say this and not be... she's an older woman. She's been around for a long time. Her and her brother have done, and her brother's passed. Her and her brother have done some beautiful, beautiful embroidery. She has a layering technique that is virtually pucker free. She teaches in Wilcom. I purchased this. It's the full video pack. It is all of her videos up through end of year 2022. And I did that because someday we're going to lose this treasure. We're not going to be able to learn from her in a live situation anymore. And I did not want to lose out on her knowledge. I did not want to not have access to her knowledge. So I bought her video package. I also bought her webinar classes through this year. I think, in my opinion, she is one of the best digitizers, one of the best digitizing teachers. And that's where this skill came from. That's where I learned how to do lettering. This lettering. And not just this lettering through the 5 millimeter, but the 3 millimeter lettering. Lee Caroselli taught me this. So I'll put a link on my YouTube. I encourage all of you to check out her site. And if you feel that she has something to offer for you, support her. Help her share her knowledge. Okay. So where are we? Yay. So I know we're a little long here. I'm going to say goodbye. Let me know if there's anything else. If you ever have a question or a comment or want to see something specific, let me know. And we'll set it up. All right. Y'all have a great day. Enjoy your weekend. Wasn't that fun? Do you have more questions? Do you want to learn something new? Join me at quicktostitch.com for coffee and conversation, and we'll talk about it. Embroidery machines, designs, and business. Hope to see you soon. Bye now.